It is now 22 days before Christmas. How does that make you feel when you hear those words? Here, I hear someone over here is going, I'm not ready. Did your heart skip a beat? You go, whoa, oh, I'm not sure about that. Or maybe you feel excited. Maybe you're really looking forward to that. Everything in our city and society right now seems to be bending towards December 25th. The stores obviously have nothing but Christmas on their minds. They want us to shop as much as possible. The radio stations, there's entire radio stations devoted to Christmas songs. If you turn on some of the streaming services, oh my goodness, it seems like there's entire channels devoted to Christmas specials. Remember when there's only like 3 or 4? Now there seems to be thousands. All sorts of rom-coms about Christmas and stuff. That city girl better not go back to that small town, you know. So, everything is just bending towards Christmas. It's as though time has become a snowy toboggan hill, and we're all on a toboggan, and at the bottom is December 25th, and we're just hurtling towards it. But it's weird, because theologically, Christmas is not the most important day of the Christian calendar, right? Easter Sunday is. That's why we meet on Sundays. Everybody can be born, but not everybody can come back from the dead. When we celebrate, this whole faith is built on the hope that came from Jesus being resurrected. And yet, that being the big day in our religion, Easter moves around. Right? This year, it was on April 9th. Next year, 2024, it'll be on March 31st. And then the year after that, in 2025, it's going to be on April 20th. It just bops around the calendar all over the place. That doesn't seem to bother us. So imagine, if you will, what if Christmas did that? What if we had Christmas on December 25th this year, but next year it's in January, and the year after that, it bounces back to November? How would that work? You can imagine how the stores would feel about it. You mean I don't get to break even until January? I think they'd be quite upset with all the bouncing around. Now let's take this little thought experiment one step further. What if Christmas came this year, but we didn't know when it was going to come next? What if it came this year, but we don't know this year if we're going to have Christmas next year or the year after? It became unpredictable. Christmas just started floating through the calendar. And you wouldn't know until like a month or two before if Christmas was happening this year or even when. Imagine how that would affect our feelings about Christmas. Lots of practical problems. You're shopping and you find that perfect outfit for your grandchild, but you go, she may grow out of this by the time we have Christmas, whenever that is. Right? You can imagine the stores would say, oh, just forget it. We can't plan if Christmas is happening. That's impossible. They'd probably say, oh, forget it. Let's just do something else. Let's make Black Friday our big shopping holiday. You can see that happening, right? Suddenly everything would be clustered around Black Friday, and Christmas would just become a kind of minor Christian festival that, sort of like St. Patrick's Day. You can do it if you want. You don't have to. That sense of the unpredictability of a wonderful thing happening is what our scripture reading today was talking about. The Christians that Jesus was speaking to, his disciples, he was saying, you know what? I'm going to come back. And when I come back, it's going to be a big deal. I'll be on a cloud. I'll be riding down from heaven. I'm going to change everything. You guys will be saved, and all those who believed in me will be saved. The world will not be the same. But I don't know when I'm coming back. The angels don't know when I'm coming back. Only God the Father knows when I'm coming back. And you might think, well, why would the Christians, these early disciples, be looking forward to Jesus coming back to such a cataclysmic, apocalyptic event? Right? Why look forward to that? Well, because back when those words were written, around the year 70, it was tough being a Christian, like really tough. The Jews hated the Christians, because they were a breakaway religious sect and they didn't agree that Christ was the Messiah. The Romans really hated the Christians. The Romans had this sort of protection deal at work with their gods. The deal was, as long as we make the sacrifices, enough sacrifices, regular sacrifices, to our gods, like the god of war, the god of love, Fortuna, every New Year's Day, everyone in the Roman Empire was expected to make a sacrifice to Fortuna, good fortune. She was the goddess who kept the Roman Empire going. If you don't make the sacrifices, the gods get upset, they withdraw their protection, then bad things start to happen. So when the Christians came along and said, none of your gods exist, I'm not making any of those sacrifices, the Romans got really upset. Because if a fire broke out, or a famine happened, or a plague happened, they would say, oh, the gods decided not to protect us because we're not making enough sacrifices, and it's you Christians' fault. And when Christians refused to make sacrifices, they were hauled in front of Roman authorities, threatened with life or death punishment, and a lot of them chose death. So they were thrown to the lions, literally in those forums, or they were crucified. So for Christians, hearing that Christ was coming back was really good news. Bring it on. I want this persecution period to end. Because Christ hadn't said, wait for me, and while you wait, hate your enemies. He'd said, love your enemies. Those people who are persecuting you, love them. Pray for them. They're my children too. That is a tough thing to do when you're being persecuted. So, for the early Christians, the sooner Jesus could come back, the better. But it's hard to encourage people to behave well when the really good payoff is far off. Just like if Christmas didn't happen for every few years or so, it would be kind of hard to encourage the kids to behave. That whole, you better be good because Santa's going to notice and maybe he'll, not give you the toys you want. That's not going to work if Santa's maybe not coming for 3 years. And among adults, we see this too, right? We like to have firm deadlines, firm dates for events that we're supposed to plan for. And if we don't have them, we don't really behave very well. In our time, climate scientists have told us that the Earth is going to be in terrible shape by the year 2050 if we don't drastically change our ways. Right? We're pumping far too much carbon and methane into the air through our cars and our transportation and our buildings and the way we manufacture things, not to mention all the pollutants that go up through the carbon industry itself, like fossil fuels industry. And they predicted that there will be famines and droughts and countries that will become uninhabitable, that the sea levels will rise, and coastal cities like New York and Boston will find themselves being inundated by water. Miami's going to be in deep trouble. And yet, for all those warnings, saying that all that stuff could come true in 2050, we haven't been moved to drop everything and change our lives. Not in the same way we did during the pandemic. There, we acted quickly. Because the problem is 2050 seems pretty far away. And everybody knows it's not an exact number. It's a kind of fuzzy number. It's not like things will be okay and then suddenly they'll be bad on 2050. We'll gradually get our way there. And so people don't concentrate very well about this. We're not good with distant deadlines. And politicians in particular, their idea of the future is always about 4 years long. So telling them that we got to change things by 2050 is like telling them we've got to change things by 3050. They're just not good at concentrating on things like this. So how do you keep people's attention for something which is happening in a distant way? Through fear? It doesn't work very well. So some other people try by saying, okay, something big is coming, and it's coming really soon, and you got to change your ways. You may recognize this guy. That's Jimmy Baker. Anybody recognize him? Yeah, he was that's what he looks like now. This is what he looked like back then. And there he is with Tammy Faye Baker. Back in the 80s, these guys were famous televangelists, right, down in the South. And Jimmy Baker had this fantastically big TV show, and he was raising all sorts of money all the time, and very, very famous until it turned out that he was also skimming money out of the people that he was raising money from, and he was sentenced to 45 years in prison for fraud, but he only served 8. And now he's back. And if you go online and you Google Jimmy Baker, you will find that every day he's got a talk show on where he talks about the world as it appears to him and his family. And what he talks about a lot is that the end times have begun. Every natural disaster, every flood, every earthquake, he reads into, this sort of thing was predicted in the book of Revelation. And he does the same thing with wars. The war in Gaza, they've been talking a lot about the war in Gaza in that show, and they've been thinking, okay, well, this is obviously the beginning of one of the 3 wars as predicted by the book of Revelation. In one of his recent shows, he said, you know what, those mainline Protestants, it's not even legal for them to talk about the book of Revelation. That's not true. I just did a Bible study on the book of Revelation. We can talk about it. But our problem with it is that we don't think that scaring people leads to virtuous action. When you scare people like that, when you say the world's about to end and you better buy my book and buy our supplies so that you'll be ready for when the end comes, well, it's a great fundraising approach. Yeah, it works that way. And the promise that if you buy books from me, Jesus will recognize you as one of his own because you listen to me. Yeah, that kind of works in one way, except that encouraging people to be that afraid leads them to conspiracy theories and buying more guns and ammo and stocking up on food and building that survival shelter. But it's not very good for getting them to help people in homeless shelters now because they become so inward-looking. Fear makes us feel quite selfish, and we want to protect ourselves against that dangerous world. So mainline Protestants, we like to go a different route. We like to go towards hope. Hope is an emotion that has been given to us by God that helps us deal with uncertainty. Hope, we lit a candle to hope today. Hope is not about being able to bend reality to your will. That's not what hope is. Hope, Emily Dickinson, the American poet, famously said, hope is the thing with feathers. It perches in the soul and it sings a song, even when things get really, really hard. It points the way towards multiple possibilities, even when there don't seem to be any possibilities at all right now. Hope on its own won't cure your cancer. Hope, however, can let us know that there's possibilities that we haven't seen, possibilities of renewal, that we can actually live through things that seem so impossible to live through now. Hope is the promise that makes no sense at all until it does. But how do you have hope? Well, hope is like a muscle. It needs to be exercised. You need to work out and actually build up your hope muscles. And the way we do that is by dwelling in hope, storing up hope. And that's what Advent's about. Advent is a season of hope, a season of expectation, where we hear the stories of the coming of Jesus when people were really, really hoping that things were going to get better. But not just one coming of Jesus, lots of comings of Jesus. Over the next few weeks, we're going to hear about how the ancient Israelites were desperate for a Messiah to save them from the multiple empires that had oppressed them. The Christmas pageant, the kids are going to show us the hope of that little family that got pregnant in a way they didn't expect, and then thought everything was going to be easy in Nazareth, but then were told they had to go to Bethlehem, and yet they didn't give up hope, and things turned out very well, even though everything went wrong. And we'll hear about the hope that we heard about today. The Christians who desperately wanted Jesus to come back and rescue them from a difficult situation. By dwelling in their hope, remembering their hope, we get to build up some of our hope. And you know what? It works. You may be skeptical, but it works. Think about just what Christmas is now in our society, right? Christmas obviously started in churches, right, with Christians celebrating Christmas in church. But there's not that many churches anymore, really. Not that many people go, maybe like 20% of the population. And yet, this whole city is obsessed by Christmas. It's like that bird that Emily Dickinson described. Hope is a bird. It flew out of churches and it spread its wings over the whole city. People who haven't a clue what Advent means are putting up Christmas decorations and are buying presents for their friends, are happily listening to Christmas music and watching Christmas specials. All of those things are full of hope. The hope for family reunions, the hope that things will get better, the hope that just people will treat each other better. Donations to charitable causes go way up in December because people just feel more hopeful. And we did that. Christians infused this society with a sense of hope which has spread far beyond church to just become a normal feeling during December. And that's a wonderful thing. And that's what you get with hope. Unexpected, unintended consequences. You never know where hope will take you. And that's why we dwell in hope, we remind ourselves of hope, we take it in, so that in January, when we put the Christmas decorations away, and everybody's gone back to their homes, we have some extra hope in us to face whatever comes in the new year. So we can be the people in life that say, no, actually, there might be another way out of this situation. And the people who look at reality and go, no, that's just the way it works, they need our hope. So this Advent season, soak in this hope. Let it infill you. Let that bird of hope inside you sing. And don't worry if it doesn't seem realistic. That's its superpower. It can turn what isn't into what is and make the world a better place. And that is indeed a blessing. Amen.